Hey free-to-play gang, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to take a look at Camille. Damn! Look at those shoes! Am I right? We're all looking at those shoes? Take a look at those shoes! Wow! Look at those amazing heels. Today we're going to take a look at Camille and we're going to take a look at her DPS output. Now the reason why I feel like she is probably going to be, like, I was super hyped about her, right? You guys already know, I was like going crazy about the fact that she has a lot of potential in her skills and of course her resonances as well. So the resonances that I'm more interested to see, which we will not have for this showcase, right? Two of them in particular. So the first is going to be this, which means she deals extra damage to enemies with bleed, and extra damage is actually 50% of her attack, which it just scales up to more DPS basically. And her R6 as well. So her R6, when she uses her third skill, it goes straight into her second skill. So that is something really quite interesting, and that definitely adds on to the fact that she becomes a really good AoE nuker because she has an AoE on her third skill, which goes straight into her second skill for another AoE nuke. Now, a lot of people are asking me this question, which is, her base attack is only 1032. Is that going to be an issue? So yes, I do understand that her attack is really low, but because of how insane her multipliers are, and for the mere fact that she lands Seer on her third skill as well, this is going to compensate for the fact that she has no attack. So like for example, just think about it in the simplest form possible, right? Let's say you apply Seer on everyone, you would increase the final damage that you deal by 25%, which means in that same vein, you can also technically increase your base attack by another 25%. And that should also give you the same result, but actually that's not really true because then you're not taking into consideration flat attack. Okay, I don't want to go into that, but anyway, with the Seer, she actually has effectively more attack power than probably even Nama at his base, which is 1330 something. Yeah, I know I forgot about Nama the last time. Okay, so for today's video, right, let's take a look at how she works. And I'm gonna use these aspers just to give her a showcase on what her R6 might potentially look like. So I'm gonna start off with an attack buff, right? The attack buff coming from Alice here. And then I'm going to use my third skill. So I'm just going to assume that I got an attack buff from someone, right? So I got an attack buff. And now we use our third skill to nuke. Let's just see how much damage this is. 39k plus. Okay, that's okay. And the reason why I say that's okay is because her stats are actually relatively low. But let's take a look at her second skill, because if she's going to gain a new turn at her R6, for example, she's going to use her second skill straight away, right? So something like this. More DPS. Okay, but the thing is, I can't really recall what actually happened here. Like the number just flew past way too fast. But anyway, I did a little bit more calculation. Alright, so let's take a look at the calculation that we have here so that we can better understand what we are looking at. Now I gone ahead to calculate my total damage before my skill multipliers and all that. So all I really did is just add up my attack power, multiply by my total crit damage, and that gives me 5946.6. Just take this as like an amount that is related to my final damage. Okay, just treat this as like the golden number. And then now, let's assume that I improve my stats a little bit, because this is on my PTR account and my stats definitely suck. Look at my attack power, right? It's only plus 1300 and my crit damage is extremely laughable. And I know these stats are probably better than some of you guys, but I didn't know what I wanted to say, but I guess I have nothing else to add. But let's say we can add an additional 1000 attack and an additional 50% crit damage, because I think that is kind of fair value in terms of what endgame builds are going to look like. It's going to be quite manageable for you to get these kind of stats basically, right? So that's actually going to increase our damage from our current stats by a damage factor of 71%, or rather 1.71 times. So we're actually going to use this to multiply the damage that we have just seen. So for example, right, assuming we did 49,000 on our third skill earlier on, that's actually going to go up to 84.5k with the new bunch of stats that we have. So that's how impactful this is going to be. But of course, on top of that, right, that's not all in her kit, because what makes her a little bit more significant is her interaction with bleeds. So what bleeding actually does is you will deal true damage equal to 50% of the debuff caster's attack, which is herself. So when she has attack buff and all that, that's going to affect the bleeding damage. And then on top of that, Seers do in fact increase the damage of bleeds as well. So her Seer debuff on her third skill is also going to improve the damage of your bleeds. So taking a look at bleeds, right, this is my current attack. So essentially it's just 1032 plus 1300, and I got 2332 here, which means that the bleeds that I'm supposed to do is 1166, but because I have an attack buff, that also has to increase by another 40%. As you can see here, your attack up increases your attack by 40%, and because we have the Seer, I also need to multiply the final bleeding amount by another 1.25 times. So yeah, this is supposed to be my current bleed, but actually I forgot to take note of my new bleed with the new stats. So if let's say I ran with stats 2, my current attack is actually 3,332, which means that my bleeding is potentially going to look like something like this. 2,915 per bleeding pop. But one thing that you might notice is that the bleeding damage that I deal is actually not true damage at all. As you can see here, right? The bleeds that I do, and I know I'm spoiling a little bit, but the bleeds that I do vary a little bit. And don't consider this guy over here. This guy has 3,700 plus bleeding damage because he had 2 stacks of bleeds. But the rest of the enemies here, they only had 1 stack. But yet, they're not taking the same amount of damage, which means bleeding is not actually true damage. It's somehow affected by their defenses, and therefore there is a disparity in the damage that we are observing here. So just take note of that. And anyway, so let's say that this was the damage that we did on our third skill, right? We crit everything. We got super lucky. Crit everything. We landed a seer on 4 of them. We didn't land a seer on the guy on the left, which means that's part of the reason why he's taking a lot less damage than the rest of them. Because if you include the seer, this is probably going to go up to about 8,000, which kind of matches because he's a very tanky Esper in the VR Battlegrounds. So our total damage considering our stat 2, which is plus 1000 attack and plus 50% crit damage, is actually going to multiply this by 1.71 times, like I said earlier, for a total of 84.5k potential total damage over here. Now, some of you guys might think that, okay, that's not much because that's like 16k on average, right? Yeah, that's no big deal. Correct, you're true, but don't forget that when we have R6, we are going to go straight into our second skill, so our damage is actually going to add on as well. And take note that this is only with 4 seer debuffs. If we had 1 more, this damage is going to go up a little bit as well, probably like 90k or something. No, maybe not 90k, maybe like 86 or 87k. Now, assuming that we had our R6, so we're going to go straight into our second skill, and this is going to pop some of the bleeding stacks that we have. So for example, some of these Espers had 2 stacks, like I said, which popped twice, and the rest of the Espers only had 1 stack, and therefore we did 39.5k only based on the yellow numbers, not based on the red numbers. Which means that, right, our second skill on its own has the potential to go up to 67.5k, assuming that we have the increased stats. And furthermore to that, our bleeding would therefore be 14.5 thousand if we only had 1 layer of bleeds on everyone. But if we had 2 layers of bleeds, that number is actually going to go up by twice, right? So it's going to go up to 29,000 damage. But of course, this is going by the fact that bleeding should do true damage, but in this case, it is clear that it is not dealing true damage at all, and I'm not sure why. So our second skill would then have a grand total of 67.5k plus 29.15... What am I saying? 67.5k plus 29k, assuming we had 2 layers of bleeds and assuming that we only had 4 out of 5 seers. That grand total is 96.7k. That is our second skill. But of course, on top of that, as you can see, we have diseased, which cannot be resisted. We have stuns as well, which because we popped the bleeds. And that is insane. So she's also a controller in that regard. But we're not even talking about the fact that she controls. We care more about her DPS in this showcase. So this is the grand total damage at R6. She can potentially S3 84.5k into her S2 for a total of 96.7k, and this S2 does not include her resonance 2. Alright, so I should state over here, no R2 plus 50% attack, which means that this skill can actually do a lot more damage. It can do potentially about another 30% more damage or something. I'm not actually very sure just yet. But yeah, just take note that this is without R2, and the reason why we need to calculate this without R2 is because we're actually going to compare her with the next best AoE damage dealer, and everyone already know who that is, right? Not Nama, Gaius. I'm talking about Gaius. So let's swap this lineup a little bit. Let's remove her. Let's add Gaius into the mix. Alright, so Gaius, he's not R6 obviously, so we're gonna use like base R0 form. And I mean, we cannot really compare his R6 to her R6. He adds an extra attack, I understand that, but the thing is her R6 is free, right? Camille's R6 is completely free. So here are the stats of Gaius. He has 2,217 attack, and he has plus 170% crit damage, which is obviously on the lower end. If you're at endgame, these stats are going to go up as well, and I'm going to account for that. So let's take a look at Gaius here, right? So in total, the same calculation, his stats, I'm just going to add up his attack and multiply by 3.2. So my final damage amount is 11,000 over here. Now, if we add another 800 attack, which I think makes sense, and another 50% crit damage for a total of 220% extra crit damage with 3,000 attack, which I think is pretty endgame. Yeah, actually that is like extremely endgame. Our final damage will then go up to 15,700, and that damage factor is therefore 15,600 divided by 11k, which is 1.43. So our damage that we're going to deal is going to go up by a factor of 43%. So let's take a look at how this works, right? Just to give you guys an example of Gaius' raw power over here. Okay, so we buff him up, we give him a turn, and we let him transform. And now we do the Gaius nuke. Boom! 96k, 96,821. Okay. it's like exactly the same as my screenshot here for some reason. Okay, but the reason why we did the same is because we failed to crit on this one guy over here, which is true, because everything else is crittable except for this guy. There's a 50% chance that we're gonna miss, so that's the reason why our damage amount is the same. So we are gonna assume that we actually full crit, okay? We didn't have this same assumption for full seer debuffs on Camille's kit. But for this case, we're gonna assume full crit. So we're actually gonna add another 18,000 to the mix for a grand total of 114,821 damage that this could potentially do with my current stats. But of course, we need to take note that in the end game, our stats are going to improve a lot more. So we need to consider our second stat, which is adding 800 attack and 50% crit damage. And therefore, our total damage would actually go up by a factor of 1.43, like we discussed earlier, for a grand total of 164,194. So that's potentially how much damage Gaius could have done in this case, assuming that he also crit the wind guy over there. So this is like his final damage, at R0 of course. And it is 164k as compared to Camille, who has 181,000, not including her R2 effect. If we included her R2 effect, this damage is going to go up by a lot more. It's going to hit 200,000. So Camille is possibly going to be able to deal a lot more damage than Gaius. And I mean, they both take 2 turns, right? Because Gaius needs to transform as well. So in terms of like clearing content that considers the turns that you're taking, Camille is also going to perform the same in that sense, but she's going to push out a lot more damage. So overall, I am super hyped about Camille, by the way. She is possibly a really good esper to build, and she's going to function really well in many different content. So in terms of like Sonic Rift, yes, obviously she's going to be good, but I mean, there's already Mona for that. But in terms of other content where you have many waves to beat, she is definitely going to be very effective because her cooldowns are super short. She has 3 turns and 4 turns on her cooldowns. So if you take a look at her kit again, right, her second skill has a cooldown of 3 turns and her third skill has a cooldown of 4 turns. So she's actually quite spammable, and of course on top of that, we have not actually taken into consideration that she has a really good first skill that extends all the debuffs on the enemy by 1 turn. And I'm not sure whether this actually applies to stuns, but you know what, let's just figure this out. Alright, so let's just assume we use Sienna. This is just a secondary test that I wanted to do just for this showcase, right? Okay, so we got some stuns here. Let's see whether we can lengthen the stun, right? Oh my god, we lengthened the stun. We lengthened the stun as well, dude. So she's actually really strong. So if we have a lot of debuffs on the enemy, then our first skill is actually going to extend so many debuffs. So she's naturally already good against bosses, because if you can chuck a lot of debuffs onto the boss, for example, like let's say Sentinel Hunt, for example, any of those bosses, right? You can chuck a lot of debuffs onto them. She's going to extend it that way. Oh my goodness, really good stuff. Okay, but anyway, I think that's it for this showcase. I just want to go through like her damage potential. And of course, this is not talking about whether is she better with the attack stat or the crit damage stat, because I know some of you guys are going to ask me that question as well. I do feel like the crit damage build is going to be a little bit better, because as you can see over here, this is like her crit damage factor, right? And this is like her attack factor. So the thing is, even if we increased her attack by, let's say, another 50%, this is probably going to go up to 45k at most, but you're going to suffer a lot in your damage regard. Because if you increase your attack by another 50%, your crit damage is going to go down by a significant amount as well. And that's definitely going to eat into your balance. So I do feel like going crit damage on her kit is still going to perform a little bit better overall. But anyway, that's it for this video. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to leave a thumbs up. It really helps the channel, and subscribe for more Dislyte content. Now with that said, this has been Derek Free to Play, and as always, I will see you in the next video.